this is Angela from Arts and Glass, and today I'm going to be walking you through how to paint our lovely trio of pumpkins using some of our rustic glazes at the studio. Now these are special paints. They behave a little differently than how our regular paints behave. When they get fired, they have these really nice multi-tonal looks to them. As you can see on here, we have, this one is the white birch color. When it goes on, it has a little bit of brown in with the white. You can really see the brush strokes as it goes through, which is really nice. I'm also going to be using Denim Days. It is this nice blue color. You can really see this one has the undertones of brown in it as well. And I'm also going to be using, very appropriate for the pumpkins, pumpkin spice. This one actually has a matte finish to it, where the others are pretty glossy, so it'll give a nice visual interest to my pieces when they're all done. For the stems, I'm going to be using two other colors. I have a Desert Pine, that's the one I did on this stem. It's also a matte one, has a nice like satiny matte finish with a little bit of brown in the greens. And the other one I have is one of our regular ones. It's called Papa Bear, so it has this nice glossy finish. I just wanted like a plain brown with that too. Now your kits for this set are going to come with enough paint so you can pick which colors that you want to do for each of your pumpkins. On my original one I did the white birch, the Denim Days, pumpkin spice. Today I'm going to mix it up a little bit and do a different arrangement of that. To help keep track of the colors, you're going to have one of these kind of tracking forms that shows you the different glazes, what they look like after they're fired. And you're also going to have this other sheet so you can track exactly what colors you decide to do for each of your pumpkins. Now you might be wondering, why do I have to keep track of which colors are which and how much I put on? One of the neat things about the Rustic Glazes is that before they get fired, they look a different color than what they look like after they're fired. So I already poured my main three pumpkin colors, and as you can see here, they look very brown at first. So this is the pumpkin spice one. It looks kind of like a brick red. My Denim Days is kind of muddy brown. I know, really appetizing colors. And the white birch, believe it or not, looks like a very, very dull wine red color. So this is one of the things you just have to trust us. I promise they're gonna look awesome when they're done. They just look a little different before they get fired. Right. So other things that I have my brushes for painting my pumpkins. I have a bowl or cauldron of water for the season. That's to rinse out my brushes in between colors, a towel to dry my brushes off between the colors, and a toothpick, because at the very end I'm actually going to etch my name or initials into the bottom of the pumpkin. That way, when it goes through the kiln, I'll know which one is mine. So we're gonna have you do the same thing too, just to make sure that you get back your pumpkins. All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and start my first coat. When we paint these on, we wanna make sure we get 3 even coats of the glaze. If you get less than that, it's not gonna blow up in the kiln, but the finish is going to be a little different. We've noticed, especially with colors like the white birch and the Denim Days, that the less coats you have on, the more brownish the colors are going to look. But the more coats you get on, the more of the actual color is going to come through for it. So, you know, if you want more white on it, make sure you definitely get the 3 solid coats. If you want more of the blue, make sure you get the 3 solid coats. Some people ask, what happens if I put extra coats on? I would say don't get more than a good 3. If you have a very thin 3 coats, you could get a 4th coat on there. I wouldn't go past that. If you have too much glaze on the pumpkin, sometimes it starts to what we call crawl. So it will actually pull away from the bisque a little bit when it gets fired. All right, so I'm gonna grab my brush, and like I said, check my tracking form. The chunky gourd, which is this one, is gonna be done in the Denim Days. I'm gonna bring that here. And this paint is washable, so that's why I didn't put anything down on the table. I'm just gonna kind of go for it. And since these are kind of organic shapes, I'm not gonna worry too much about, you know, stopping too neatly where the pumpkin color is gonna meet the stem color. If they blend a little bit, I feel like it looks a little more natural anyway. And you know, we just wanna have fun with it. Now you're gonna notice when you paint the pumpkins that the first coat dries very, very quickly. The pottery is like a sponge, so it's gonna soak up that first coat really, really easily. So pretty much by the time you get through and do your first coat all the way around of a pumpkin, you're probably ready to get your second coat on there too. Just keep track of how many you do and when. As you're brushing the glaze on too, if you notice you start to get some of these little crumbs on it, that just means that, you know, you may need a little more paint on your brush at a time. So when I do my pumpkins, I like to go all the way around like the crown of the pumpkin first. Kind of extend it down a little bit. And then I'll worry about painting the bottom. I like to do the pumpkin color first, that way I have the handle to hold on to. There we go. Now when you're painting these at home, if someone comes in and they're like, oh, what lovely brown pumpkins you have, this looks great, you can make sure you tell them like they're gonna turn cool colors after it gets fired. When we do Christmas trees in this studio, we have glazes just like this, and when they dry, they look brown, dark red, sometimes they're even gray. So it's another one of those, like, you know, what you see at first isn't necessarily what it's gonna fire to. It looks a lot better after it fires. There we go. And as you can see where the handle meets my pumpkin here, I'm not gonna be too worried again about, you know, getting it just right. Kind of like poke some paint in there and poke some paint in the underside. And again, I'm not gonna think too much about it. All right, so now I'm gonna do the bottom half of my pumpkin, and I'm gonna make sure I paint the whole bottom of it. When I do that, I usually go around the part that's gonna sit on the table first, just so that can dry the fastest. So I can actually set it down if I need to. Now with these colors, how you brush it on, like the brush strokes of it, sometimes show in the patterns of it. So when I do the pumpkins, I try to actually keep the strokes up and down, like with the lines of the pumpkin. You don't have to do that. If you want kind of like, if you want to do like cross hatching, you could do that too. It's your pumpkin. That's just how I do it. There you go. And get a little more over here. When I paint my first coat on for each pumpkin, it's pretty easy to see what I have and have not painted. With my next coats, it's gonna be a little harder to see, so I wanna make sure as I start, I kind of work all the way around the pumpkin evenly so I don't miss any spots. And I'll get a little bit on the top, or bottom I should say. Make sure I didn't miss anything. All right, as you can see, that is almost dry already. When the sheen of the glaze goes away, that's how you know it's pretty dry. It gets pretty fast. So I'm gonna mark on my sheet that I've done one coat of my Denim Days on that one first. So from here on out, whenever I start, I'm gonna have it start right at the point where the stem meets the pumpkin. That way I know where I began with that next coat. So I'm gonna poke some paint in there. Go right down the pumpkin. This is one of those projects that I find very stress relieving because a lot of it is, you know, once you pick the colors where you want it to be, it's just the execution of the project and you can kind of zone out and just relax painting the pumpkins. There. Oh, I actually see when I did my one originally, I missed a little spot in there. Just gonna poke some paint in there. It's all good. There we go. And I'll get some on the bottom part. Kind of paint that little ring that's going to touch the table first. That way, again, that dries the fastest. And when you're painting this, you want to avoid having blobs of paint. So if I had like a big thing like that, that's a bit of a big blob. I want to make sure I kind of spread that bad boy out. So I'm going to take some, spread it here, and spread it along the sides. Excellent. And again, I'm keeping my brush strokes, you know, parallel with those lines of the pumpkin. That way, if I do see some brush strokes in this, it'll look really nice because it follows that natural curve. There we go. Now, when you get your glazes too, they're going to be labeled with their names on them. So just try to keep in mind, you know, what glazes are where. You could even set your little cups on the reference guide that you have too. Kind of like put the white birch cup right on top of this one and, you know, Denim Days on top of his and pumpkin spice there. Just to make sure you know which one is going where. All right. Excellent. Make sure all my blobs are spread out. So now that I got 2 coats on of the Denim Days on here, I'm gonna let him dry. So put you back over here, buddy. And I'm gonna mark down on my tracking sheet, I did 2 coats of that one. So now I'm gonna rinse out my brush and start doing some coats on my other big pumpkin, just to let that dry pretty nicely. Go. Gently dab my brush on my towel. You want to make sure that your brush isn't wet when you move on to the next paint color. That'll water down the glaze and that's not really what you want. I'm actually going to use a little bit of water just to wipe my area so you can really see how washable it is. And this way I don't transfer any of that glaze to my next pumpkin. All right, so on my tall gourd, I'm going to be doing the pumpkin spice on it. So bring that over here. All right. I mean, at least this color, when it, you know, starts to go on the pottery piece, it looks a little closer to an orange. But, you know, again, they are gonna look different when they get fired. One of the things I like best about these glazes is that they settle into the natural texture of a pottery piece. So that means for the pumpkins, they're gonna settle into all those little lines, those grooves on it. And so that's gonna look really cool with this. Any of the textured pieces that we have in the studio, from Christmas trees to we have some pieces that are embossed with patterns, they do really, really well with those specialty glazes for that reason. I have noticed one thing about the pumpkin spice glaze. When you're painting it on, you just want to make sure you really spread out any excess that kind of settles into the grooves. I did one pumpkin where I really just caked the paint on. I didn't listen to any of my advice when I did it. And I had a little bit of crawling. Again, that's where there's too much glaze in one area and it starts to kind of pull away from the pottery. So just want to make sure the coats are nice and even. You don't want them blobby or really thick. And you kind of see when I get up to the top, a good trick is to start like just before where the stem is, and I kind of like push the paint up a little bit just so it kind of like nudges into it. And again, they're pretty organic, so if you have some overlap there between the two colors, it'll look pretty cool. Wherever the colors overlap, they do some pretty unexpected but very cool reactions in the kiln. So you'll see that between different color combinations where they meet at the top there. Like I said, it's unpredictable, but that's probably the beauty of it. It's one of those things that, you know, you don't get to see exactly just how it's going to behave until it goes through the kiln and is fired. And a little more on this side. And I like painting pumpkins. I mean, I like painting jack-o'-lanterns too, but pumpkins are nice because I feel like I can have them out all fall. So not just through October through Halloween, but I can have them out for all of November really, because they're great for Thanksgiving decoration. I've taken a wooden tray and kind of laid out the pumpkins on it, put some leaves just like we have here, even some acorns and pine cones, and it makes a really nice centerpiece. All right, paint my bottom here. Zoop. I didn't take my advice on this one, and I didn't paint my little ring that sits down first, but that's okay. All right. Launch that for a minute. While it's drying, because I can't set it down, I'm gonna go to my tracking sheet and mark down that I did my first coat of pumpkin spice on my tall gourd. Lovely. And that dried pretty quick, so I'm gonna go ahead and get my second coat on there. Now, you don't have to put the second coat right on immediately. So if you want to like take a break, go get a snack. It's not like you have to like do it right away. I mean, I wouldn't wait like months to paint the second coat, but you know, you can let it sit for even like a day or something too. As we all know, stuff comes up, especially nowadays. So while the second and third coats for these pieces are gonna take longer to dry, they go on, like the paint glides on a lot more easily after the first coat. So it's faster to paint, just slower to dry. There we go. Excellent. Turn them around gently. So I did talk about that after the pieces are done and drying, that the colors are going to look different than after how it fires. So that means really that after you're done painting your piece, you just want to let it dry overnight at least, and then bring it back to the studio. And here at Arts and Glass, we will fire it in the kiln. So here's a little known fact. Regular glazes on pottery pieces get a clear coat of glaze on top of all of them. That helps to make sure that everything is sealed on there. Anything that isn't painted will have a glossy finish. That's how pieces normally go. With these specialty glazes, they actually don't get a clear coat on top. They're not meant for that. So instead, that's why we need to make sure we get that 3 coats of paint that we talk about on here. Anything that I don't paint with my Rustic Glazes is going to just be the scratchy white bisque when it's finished. So if I were to stick this pumpkin in the kiln right now as is, when he comes out, you know, the pumpkin itself would have that really cool pumpkin spice color to it, but the top would just look exactly like it looks now. Maybe you want that look, but just that, you know, anything you don't paint would, you know, look exactly like how the pottery looks today. Okay. All right, so I got my second coat on there. Rinse out my brush. And before I forget, I want to make sure I mark down that I got my second coat on of the pumpkin spice. All right, so now for my little pumpkin. He is so cute. I'm going to use my white birch, which kind of looks like, I don't know, a really weird hot cocoa right now. I'm not sure. This one I guess I'll use my big brush again. Oh, I should probably give a quick wipe of my place here so I don't contaminate that. And just like before, I'm going to start pretty much where that stem meets the pumpkin, just so I know where my beginning is. I decided to go with a small brush for this one because it's a little trickier to get around the stem. And there's no law that says that you even have to do the stem a different color. If you wanted, you could just paint the whole thing that color and it'd still look really cool in the end. So I don't think that you have to do that. And if you like any of these 3 main colors that we're doing the pumpkins in, you could pick one of these for the stems for any of the others too. You can get very creative with it. So try to be careful painting around my stem, but I'm not going to go crazy with it. All right. I paint the rest of them. As the paint's drying on here, it does actually make a really nice kind of mauve color, which itself would be a nice color on a pumpkin too. But I'll still take the cool white birch color that it fires into. I feel like another reason that I like painting the pumpkins is that I'm one of those people that really doesn't have a lot of patience for carving pumpkins. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's like the consistency of like the pumpkin guts inside when you have to scoop them out, or just like the impatience of having to carve it and do it nicely. But yeah, I just like painting them on. I'm also not one of those, like, I don't really care for a lot of pumpkin flavor things. Maybe that's why. But I love painting a good pumpkin. Here. And finish up that spot there. And I'll get the bottom of my pumpkin. Alright. And when I turn them over, you can see how light it looks now. That means it's already dry. I'm pretty ready to get my second coat on right away, even though it's a smaller one. Just kind of hold them very carefully. So kind of edge the stem a little bit first. Again, I kind of just like poke the paint right up to the stem. And poke it under the stem. Perfect. So I can paint now the length of the pumpkin. And you can really see there, like, the difference between once it's dried and when it's wet. And now that you're starting to see all the pumpkins painted with these colors, I have to reiterate just trust me, I promise they're gonna fire into these colors when it's all done. Perfect. All right, so I'm coming around to the beginning here. Just a little bit more there. All right, and I got the bottom. Paint around that ring that's gonna sit on the table. Fill the inside. And any extra I have sticking out, I'm just gonna brush that out, because we do not want any globs of paint. All right. So set him there to dry. Put that back. All right, so I'm gonna get my chunky pumpkin, my chunky gourd, and I'm gonna do 2 coats of the Papa Bear, which is our regular brown color, on top of that. So I'm just gonna pour some out in my tray. So I don't need a lot for the stems. And I'm gonna use my big brush for it, at least in the beginning. Whoop. Yep, that's a spot. I usually don't make it through a video without spilling paint somewhere, so I guess that's gonna count for my spill today. Hopefully. We'll see. Now the brown is gonna dry looking like a normal brown. So that'll be an easy one to tell. And if it overlaps just a little bit of where my rustic color was, again, I'm not gonna worry about that. It's an organic shape, so it's gonna have some organic coloration. And try to get some underneath the stem there. And this side. Here we go. It is a little tricky getting like right under the stem there, but it's not too bad. On there. And even with the stem for the brush strokes, if I can help it, I'll have it try to follow the curve of the stem itself, if possible. And you know, it's a stem, it should look a little gnarly. All right. And I'm gonna go ahead and get my second coat on there, starting on this side. Now I decided to just do Papa Bear for one of my pumpkin stems. The other two, I'm going to use my desert pine. I love, love, love the matte glazes that we have. So I wanted to make sure I used at least one of them for mine, because the desert pine of all of ours is, you know, is a really, really nice matte one. The pumpkin spices too. Finish this side here. Whoop. Shoop. Okay, so I got 2 coats of the brown on my pumpkin stem. I don't know if you can see. My water is really starting to look like a witch's brew. Very seasonal. So I'll set that back here. And I will mark that off on my sheet. We did 2 coats of Papa Bear on the chunky board. Move that over, wipe my space. All right, so my tall gourd and my mini chunky gourd are both gonna have that desert pine like I was saying. So I'm gonna bring them both over. And since these stems are a lot smaller, I'm gonna switch over to my little brush for them. I have my desert pine, a nice green that looks kind of reddish at first. Now these 2 colors look very similar, but luckily I do have like that line in the pumpkin, so I'll know where one begins and ends. There we go. Ooh, missed his spot. There we go. Good, we get the top too. gourd. Dab that paint in there. And not stressing out about how I put it on there, just kind of push the brush to right where the stem meets that pumpkin. And then follow the curve of my stem. Now with my little one, he's a little tricky to kind of get that glaze in there. So I'm just going to take my brush and kind of poke it right in there. Poke, poke. Perfect. All right. And I can get my second coat on here. Again, I'll just pay attention to right where my stem meets the pumpkin. I push my brush into it with some paint. Zoop, zoop, zoop. And brush up the stem of it. Excellent. All right, so 2 coats of that on there. If you start to get a little bit of the glaze on your fingers just from handling the pumpkins, I just wipe it on your towel just to make sure you're not, transferring glaze from one pumpkin to the next. And a little bit on this one. And I have noticed that if you're pretty careful with your first 2 coats for the stems, when you do your third, it doesn't have to be super, super perfect. All right. So I got 2 coats of the desert pine on my stems. I'll close that up for now. Wash that brush out. Keep track of that on my paper. Desert pine, 2 coats for each. All right, so now I am ready to start getting my 3rd coats on all of my pumpkins. And after that, the only thing left to do is fire it. So that brings me one step closer to seeing what they look like all done. I'm gonna give my hands a quick wipe because I am starting to pick up some paint from how I've been painting. That there. All right, so chunky gourd, come on down. We're gonna get our last coat of the Denim Days on this one. Get my brush ready. And make sure I know where I'm starting. I'm gonna start right where that stem meets the gourd. Kind of poke the paint underneath the stem. Alright, so now I got all my sides painted. I'm gonna give all around the ring a quick coat and then paint inside that. And while this paint is still wet on the bottom, I am going to use my toothpick to etch my name. Again, we want to make sure that all pumpkins go to their rightful artists. So you definitely want to make sure you get your name on the bottom of your pumpkin. Name, initials, something that identifies it. Unless you want to take a chance. All right, just gonna etch my name in there. And if you have those little crumbs on there, which you probably will, I would wait to brush those off until it's completely dry, just so you don't smudge any of the paint. All right, let him sit there. And you get some paint on yourself, just give a little beat. And I have my third coat done on my chunky gourd. So now I'm going to move on to the pumpkin spice, which is on my tall gourd. Get this wipe down here. That one is pumpkin spice, so I'll grab that bottle or tray. And I'm going to start right where, I mean, the stem doesn't actually touch the pumpkin, but I'm gonna have it where it's pointing closest to me. I'll start on that side. Use nice even strokes. In keeping with the curve of the pumpkin itself. And making sure that I don't have glaze collecting in that crevice there. Now we talked about how these glazes don't get a clear coat on top, so it's pretty much anything they put you on here is what's gonna be on your pumpkin when it comes through the kiln. We could talk about exactly what happens in the kiln. When we put the pieces in, we stilt them, so that means instead of the piece actually just sitting on each of the shelves in the kiln, it's raised up with little stilts that have little pins on the bottom. That's why you're able to actually paint the bottom of your gourds and pumpkins, and any pottery piece for that matter. We fire the kiln for about 7 hours, and it gets up to 1800 degrees for these pieces, which is just a little hot. That heat is what makes these glazes mature into these really cool colors that I have on my sample tiles. And it also makes it so the paint is permanent on your piece. It also makes the glazes food safe. Not that you're planning on eating off of your pumpkins. If you can figure out how to do that, I guess you're good to go. But for any other pieces that go in the kiln, that's the case for that. As I was painting this, I kind of put them down kind of hard, so I have a little gouge in my paint right here. I'm just gonna patch that in right now. There we go. Now, just because the kiln runs for 7 hours, unfortunately doesn't mean that we're able to get those pieces out of the kiln in just 7 hours. It takes about 26 hours from the time the kiln starts till the time we can unload the kiln. All the pieces have to cool down till room temperature. We don't want to risk thermal shock and have any pieces crack. But when they come out, we take them off their stilts, sand down any sharp marks that a stilt might make, and then we will pack your pieces up so you can pick them up and take them home to enjoy. We love to see pictures of your pieces in their natural habitat at home. So when you get your pumpkins and you have them set up on your dining room table, on the mantle, or wherever you end up putting them, please show us. We like to see what they look like. All right, so very carefully turn my pumpkin around to paint the bottom. Now, if you're trying to paint your pumpkins and you notice it's a little hard to pick up, like if you try to pick it up and there's a lot of paint coming off on your fingers, it probably means your pumpkin is too wet to paint the next coats. Not a problem. Just take a pause for, a couple minutes. Go get that snack or drink, and then come right back to it. And if you notice a little spot where the paint is it got dented or something from holding it, just go back in and patch it up with a coat or two of paint and you'll be all right. All right. And now while I have this here, I'm going to etch my name into this one. There's a smaller space to write your name in for the tall gourd, so even if you get your initials, that's fine too. There we go, got my name. And again, those crumblies, I'm just going to wait, resist the temptation to brush them off. We can do that afterwards. Okay, wipe my spot down. Not cause an earthquake here. Let's see where I'm at. So I'm gonna mark down that I did my 3rd coat of the pumpkin spice on my gourd. And now my chunky gourd, my little one, is up next. I wanna really make sure that my hands are wiped because I wanna transfer glaze. Got my brush from my cauldron here. And we're gonna get one more coat on this one. Whoop. Almost forgot. I'm gonna start right where my stem meets the pumpkin. That way I keep track of where it is. I can use my little brush just to get under that stem there. And again, if I have a lot of paint on my brush, I just want to make sure I spread that all out. We don't want any globs of the paint sitting on here. So I'll kind of brush those down the pumpkin. Now, if I don't get all the way to the stem with my pumpkin color for the 3rd coat, it's not the end of the world, because like I was saying before, especially for the white birch and the denim days colors, that if you get less coats, you're gonna have more of that brown color. More coats is gonna have more of that white color. So if I have a little less of that glaze right next to the stem, it's just gonna look a little darker there, and that seems kind of like a natural look for a pumpkin stem. All right. So Now that I made it all the way around doing that edge, I can paint right down the length of my pumpkin. Shoop. I feel like that's the scientific sound of the paintbrush going down the pumpkin is zoop. Feel free to develop your own terminology for it too and share with us. On my pumpkin, the brush goes zoop. And I'll tell you, looking at the pumpkin as I'm painting it with this color, I really kind of want a mauve pumpkin now. So I guess we'll just have to make another set after this. And in the studio, you can paint the pumpkins with any colors, really. We have a very wide range of these rustic colors, and we have a ton of, our standard colors, like that brown too. So you don't even have to just make it one color. You can make rainbow designs. You can paint faces on them instead of carving them. It's pretty versatile. All right. So I really don't have a lot of real estate on the bottom of this pumpkin, so I think it's just gonna be my initials. A, B. All right. I'm not gonna put this down just yet because that's really wet, but I will mark off that I did my third coat for it. All right, so we're really come down the home stretch here. All that's left is to do the third coat of our stems. And now my water's getting pretty brown and yucky. That's okay. All right, little pumpkin, you sit there. Now my original pumpkin, my chunky gourd, quick wipe, is gonna get one more coat of the Papa Bear brown. That's this one here. And I'm gonna use this to kind of poke in there to get the underside first. Might as well get the hard part out of the way. There we go. And then kind of poke it under there too. Brass tacks, you're not really going to be looking that much underneath the handle of the pumpkin. So again, don't stress out about getting too much paint in there. There we go. Sometimes I might get like a little crumb of the paint. If that happens, just kind of sweep it off with your brush and just put it to the side. Sometimes if paint starts to dry somewhere and then falls into the paint, that'll happen. You don't really want it on your pumpkin in the end, so we'll just kind of take that off. I'm very careful I get this part in here. Shoop. All right. Make sure I'm happy with how that looks. And I am happy with how that looks. Make sure I spread out any blobs. I think that looks great. So I put that there. I mean, yeah, they'll look brown right now, but I still think it looks great. All right, I'm gonna mark down that I did my third coat on that stem. I'll wipe my hands. All right, last thing, we're gonna get a little bit of that desert pine green, that matte green color on the stems of my tall pumpkin, my tall gourd, and my little short one. And get my small brush for this. And just very carefully put the paint on there. There we go. Wow, painting these now makes me really want to see what they look like finished. So really the hardest part of this project is probably waiting for the pieces to get fired. When you bring it to the studio, we'll let you know what the current wait time is. It's usually about a week. If it's a really busy time of year, it might be a little longer, but you know, the pumpkins usually go through pretty quickly. There we go. And a little bit for the top of the stem. All right, pumpkin, you are done. And we get a little more on this stem. Kind of poke some in there. I got a little bit on the pumpkin as I did that, but I am not gonna worry about that. So that's gonna just about do it for my little pumpkin. You're all done there. And I'm gonna mark off that I got my third coats of that desert pine green on those last two pumpkins. Got 3 coats on everything, so that's all done. My pumpkins are done. So I'll close that up there. I'll let them dry for 24 hours and then I will fire them and you'll get to see what they look like when they're finished. I hope you enjoy painting your pumpkins. We're very excited to see how they turn out. Yeah, hope you join us next time. Bye.